Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, June 27th. That means it is Project Prospect Day here on the show. Derek and Riper, Eno Saris, Chris Welsh, all here in the house this week. Lots to cover. I tried to make the rundown smaller to give us a chance of getting through it. We have a lot of promotions as we look for players who might debut in the big leagues in the second half of the season. It feels like that big wave of first half call-ups is finally coming to an end, but that means there's more players we could see possibly in July or August or September of this year. Some of those players are going to play in the Futures game on the Saturday of All-Star Weekend. So we'll talk about those rosters because those were recently released. Welsh has been at the complexes in Arizona, so we got some observations from him. Got a few mailbag questions, time permitting, as well as there are a lot of questions about Dylan Crews and Paul Skenes rolling in fresh off of LSU's College World Series win on Monday night. So we begin today with some promotions, gentlemen. We've got several players getting bumps up that could make an impact in the big leagues. And I actually wanted to start with Colt Keith today. Colt Keith, because I think the Tigers are one of those teams that haven't really brought a lot of guys up. We've seen Reese Olson debut on the pitching side. You've got Colt Keith and Justin Henry Malloy, who's also going to be in the Futures game as two position players that should have a chance to make some kind of impact later on this year. And I think the good news is if you spend a lot of fab already and you're thinking about future spending, you may be able to add both of those guys at relatively low cost based on when they come up. But the bigger question is, are they good, Welsh? Are we to be excited about Colt Keith and Justin Henry Malloy as players that might come up later on this season and actually take on some prominent spots in that rebuilding Tigers lineup?
Both players good. Got to see both of them last year in the Arizona Fall League. I mentioned it. Arizona Fall League, got to see both these players. No shocker, a lot of these guys that come up. Colt Keith was one that actually stood out last year as well. He was one of those I had pinpointed as a player that I thought in the AFL could really dominate, and he did, especially on the back end, and he's carried over into this year. He's spent most of his time at Double-A, done a really good job hitting over 300, almost a 400 OBP. The power has surged. That was the big thing I was waiting for. It's like a last at bat in the Fall League last year. I've got on video if anyone wants to check it out. Beautiful homer. And he crushed over left field. Plays, at least last year when I saw him in person, the kind of suspect third base. He can play any of the corner infield spots, makes a lot of contact. Someone asked me about him the other day, and I likened him to maybe, it might be 1-for-1, but I was thinking maybe a better power potential Ty France type of player. Can make a lot of contact, barrels the ball, not going to be an elite home run hitter. I think there is more power for the potential to happen. And this year, I think he's kind of answered every single call. I just don't know defensively how they're going to manage him and how I haven't paid attention to how, the positive reactions have been for his defensive side if he could play third base for them. But I really like him, and I think he's the big offensive side where Justin Henry Malloy, I saw play multiple positions, makes a ton of contact. I don't think he's exceptional as far as power or speed go. I think this is a player that could hit down the road, like be like a number 3 hitter, almost like a Lourdes Gurriel, like Lourdes Gurriel's doing. He's having a little bit of power surge, but again, he's not a big power or speed guy, but makes a ton of contact where someone might want to put him 3, maybe even 2. But if I was making a bet on one of these players this year, Colt McCoy, I think, makes the bigger Colt Keith, yeah, Texas, Colt McCoy in my head. Colt Keith,
famous Colts for 300, please.
Yeah, all the Colts makes the better offensive upside for fantasy would be Colt Keith over Malloy, at least in my thoughts.
Yeah, I was there at that fall league talking to Colt Keith about how he seemed like a let it travel guy. He had shorter pull rates in the lower leagues in A ball, about a 34% pull rate. So I was talking to him about being a let it travel guy and what he was doing at the AFL, and Colt Keith said that he was there to learn to get the ball out front and to kind of toggle that pull push ratio to kind of get more power while not striking out a lot more. And I think what's so cool about the A ball that he sort of finished with last year and then what he's done this year at Double A is that the whiffs have gone down while the pull rate has gone up. And so this year at Double A, Colt Keith has a 45% pull rate and a 260 ISO. And this is kind of my favorite player, profile sometimes in terms of like, could he put a good batting average together with good power? And I think guys that can both pull and push, and can do so selectively while having a sub 10% swing strike rate, I think that's the kind of guy we talk all the time. How is this strikeout rate going to port over? I think it's going to port over well. I think he's going to strike out less than 20 to 24, 25% of the time. And I think he's going to have a 200 ISO or better.
An extra piece to throw in with him.
You're talking about good players.
And also his ground ball rate on top of all of that. You like adjusting to how you're hitting. You're not striking out more. You're successfully pulling. And his ground ball rate is the lowest of his career. It dropped down to 34% in AA, where it was 45% or higher the last 3 stops in the minor league. So, I mean, those are 3 successful changes for this guy who has some high upside potential that I think scream jump in on. Because I'm really glad you mentioned the pull rate change, because that's the most significant. But on top of not like, while the adjustment's happening, hitting more ground balls or striking out more, none of those things are happening. He's a super, super smart kid. And he still has that ability that's in him of letting the ball travel a little bit and just, working on your pitch recognition or leaning back on your pitch recognition, what he's doing. And he's hitting 325. He's kind of a sneaky monster.
I think look at the amount of playing time the Tigers were giving to Nick Maton before they optioned him. He's basically been the regular third baseman for a long stretch this season. That's one spot that's open. They're playing Andy Ibanez a lot right now, kind of at second and third. That's another guy that you could probably play less, especially if you bump Jonathan Scope off the roster before the end of the season. That seems inevitable. So it's really easy to make room for both of these guys.
Yeah, Colt Keith is playing second and third. He's played DH too, but it's basically 2/3 third base and then splitting the last 1/3 between second and DH for Colt Keith in the minors. So I think that I think that's it. The Scope is the name. He's going to go soon. And when that happens, Andy Ibanez can DH for them when Miguel Cabrera's not playing. Andy Ibanez can play the outfield. Andy Ibanez may or may not be part of the future. So maybe I think what they're trying to do is see how much of, how much is Andy Ibanez part of the future. I did a quick query here to find some possible comps for Colt Keith in the majors. Kept the strikeout rate under 24%, the ISO over 200, and I'm looking at guys who don't have really big pull rates. Paul Goldschmidt is on this list. This is the second show in a row where I'm comping somebody to Paul Goldschmidt. Let me just leave him off.
All right,
the
Harold
list.
Reynolds. Anybody else?
Oh, here's an interesting one. Spencer Steer.
Spencer Steer seems like a kind of reasonable expectation for a comp.
Yeah,
I like that.
Spencer Steer. Will Smith doesn't strike out even close to 20%, so I don't think him. But Anthony Santander, there's more pull there.
Are there any bad names? Because this is a pretty good list of names you're throwing out here.
There's a lot that pull more. Christian Walker, Rafael Devers. Those are on the high end if he starts accessing like 240 power. But
love it.
It's down by 200. There's a lot of guys around him that just have way bigger pull rates, like Lindor and Paredes are right there, and Jose Ramirez. But
it's a lot of good players in that.
Yeah, but if I tell you that the guy's going to strike out less than 24% of the time and have an ISO over 200, I don't even have to tell you the pull part. These are all good names.
Yeah, that's a good combination of skills.
Yeah, I mean the worst name, Lourdes Gurriel is on here, but that was your Malloy.
That was Justin Henry Malloy. Yeah.
I mean, what's the worst name on here? I mean, Marcelo Zuna, I guess, but he's having a good year, so that doesn't even count. Jorge Soler's on here, but that's the higher end of the power. Yandy Diaz is on here. I mean, the whole list is good. So if he can manage less than 24% strikeout rate and the over 200 ISO, he's going to be a good player.
All right. Well, we can move on to a couple other players who were recently promoted within their organizations. Dustin Harris in the Rangers organization, promoted to AAA. And if I remember correctly, at some point, Dustin Harris was someone you either featured as prospect of the week or mentioned as a prospect of the week years ago.
He's a guy that I've really liked. He's got these really nice walk rates. The whiff rate has been climbing. He's kept the strikeout rate under 23% or around 23%, this year. But the whiff rate has climbed from kind of 7 to 8% to around 12% for Dustin Harris. So I'm cautiously optimistic about his strikeout rate. I do think he's got a good hit tool. The power has been up and down. And so when I was really excited about him was after the end of 2022, he'd had an ISO over 200 and a strikeout rate under 20% at high A and double A, Dustin Harris had, and with steals. This year, the ISO has gone down to 162. And so I think it's fair to wonder what his true talent power looks like. But he's also, surprisingly to me, I guess, I don't know if I just missed the boat on this, but he's 25 out of 27 on stolen base attempts. So I think I saw the fact that he was listed as a first baseman and thought, this guy, you know, this guy's not gonna be fleet of foot, But I had that wrong. He's playing a lot more corner outfield, Dustin Harris is. So I think I'm gonna revise my expectations down to more of like a 260 hitter with 20 homers and 20 steals that plays left field. The problem that I have with him is that Ezekiel Duran is playing really well for the Rangers. And so I'm not sure that I see a real opening for Dustin Harris this year without injury because Leotis Taveras has really taken off. And as much as Robbie Grossman and Travis Jankowski are boring, Ezekiel Duran is playing and playing well. And with Mitch Garver on that team, Duran needs to play in the outfield, and he has been playing the outfield. So, this is a stacked team all of a sudden, and I don't think they bring up Dustin Harris to replace Robbie Grossman as the fourth outfielder. Maybe, but I don't think so.
I think I see a little more of a speed over power contribution from Harris based on what we're getting from him in the upper levels in the minors. But I do think being in a situation where the Rangers are scoring a ton of runs, but they don't necessarily have a glaring hole in the lineup at the moment, that makes it harder for him to break through than it is for those two Tigers prospects that we just talked about. Real quick on Leody Taveras, Welsh. This is, to me, a good reminder of sometimes it just doesn't happen on our timetable. I mean, this is a guy that was on prospect list years ago, was a redraft darling after he debuted as a possible speed play, an up and down guy for the better part of 3 seasons, and now it does seem like everything is kind of falling into place. He's doing a good job not chasing a ton of pitches outside the zone. The hard hit rate is up a bit this year. There's some speed and power. Like, we knew there was going to be speed, but 8 homers this year in just 64 games is a pleasant surprise. Like, do you believe in Leody Taveras as the prospect that finally put it all together, just on a different timeline than we wanted?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a linear path. We did the same thing with Estoy Ruiz. He had like 3 years of being mediocre that no one cared about anymore. It was swing and miss and couldn't hit for contact. Like, there's so much that goes into this. And it's sometimes if you go back to like day one to then present, it would look like, hey, look, it was all happy, but then the waves and the ups and downs, and Leody is, like you said, a total prime example of that. Best hard hit numbers of his career so far in the majors. Expected stats kind of across the board are just in line with where he currently is. Max EV over 90, which you like to see, and barrel percentage is at least rising. It's the highest of his career. I think instead of being the high upside, at the time we looked at him as like a 2020 guy, that's kind of that marker of like the elite prospect. I think he's putting himself into a really good position to be like a 15-15 guy. And a lot of these players, the amount of time it takes to learn to, pull, not hit ground balls while hitting for power and maintaining pitch recognition and kind of determining what player you are. Sometimes it takes a year, sometimes it takes 5 years. And I think he's just settling into this like solid 15-15 player, but maybe there's more change in there. Maybe he's going to hit for a little bit more power. Maybe he will run a little bit more. Either way, he's just been solid, and he's overtaken Bubba Thompson. Bubba Thompson was the guy last year that I think everybody would have started to clamor for because he was stealing bases at a really aggressive clip. But Leody Taveras has built a floor. So I think this is sustainable if your expectations are like 15-15. But funny enough, Ezekiel Duran is the most exciting of all of these guys, and he looks like the best floor with fantasy upside. And I think that does put a little bit of a cap on not just Dustin Harris, but throw out Evan Carter. You talk about Dustin Harris coming up. Evan Carter was another one of those guys that might have been the player that came up soon. And he's a guy that is 100% in the plans. And then a third is Luis Angel Acuna has been playing, I believe he played center field the other day. So the Rangers have also moved him into playing a little bit of outfield. So you've got Harris, Carter, and Acuna maybe all vying for what? One outfield spot in the near future. So what fantasy value any of them brings this year, I think it's pretty minimal to what you guys just talked about. But Dustin Harris might be the best short term of those players because of some position flexibility as well. He can play first base. He can play those corner outfield spots and some stolen bases. But yeah, I buy into Leody Taveras as the 15-15 capped player.
Yeah, a lot of red lollipops on the StatCast page, and in places that really matter as far as keeping the playing time steady, too. Defensively, grading out very well in center field, 93rd percentile in outs above average, 90th percentile in outfielder jump, 92nd percentile in arm strength. He's also 94th percentile in sprint speed, but putting the most of the offensive characteristics we want on top of that. I almost wondered a few years ago, I think it was 2021 at AAA, he started to get to more power. I wondered if that almost led to some bad habits. Sometimes you see guys that get into those hitter-friendly environments, especially in the PCL. The ball starts flying, and I'm a power hitter now. I can launch the ball more than I should, and you make different swing decisions. Maybe some of that was happening.
It's like what happens with pitchers, and people got to remember this all the time. You get like a college pitcher that goes to low A or high A and can dominate with let's just say the fastball, and it can just pump fastballs left and right. Sometimes you're going to see some growing pains when you get into double A, or you see those 22-year-old. There's a couple of these guys, 21, 22-year-old pitchers that are down in low A, just absolutely dominating. And you got to remember, how much is that pitch mix really being taken advantage of, because they can do one thing really, really well. And the same thing kind of happens for hitters. Like, oh, I know I can just sit on the fastball and I can pull the living crap out of it. But getting into being able to hit opposite field or not try to get the ball on the ground, there's so much adjustment period of time that, like, for people for fantasy, you always have to decide, who are you? Do you only care about now, proximity, and using prospects as assets to move through? Or are you here in the long term to take advantage of some of the best skill sets? Because it might be a little bit more brutal, but the payoff can be way, way more appetizing when these guys actually do work out, if you can wait for them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a lot, in terms of learning lessons for the future about Taveras. I don't necessarily see a lot before 2020 where I'm like, oh, I need to track this player. I need to have this player on my minor league rosters, though. It's a sub 100
He was almost
ISO.
an afterthought.
Huh?
He was almost a complete afterthought, to your point. Like, we were like, all right, we're done. We're done with him. Goodbye.
I don't even know if we talked about him on the outfield preview. We did 3 different episodes digging through the entire outfield pool back in the winter, and I don't recall us even mentioning Taveras. I mean, that's
you mean this year?
For this year, yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm trying to look pre 2020, because at least this year we had a 3-year track record of a guy who was basically near league average with the stick and had speed. So, I could totally see drafting him this year as a late, draft and hold, or even a bench piece in a 15-teamer where you're like, I didn't draft enough speed, and this guy might take the opening day role. And you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a draft case for him this year, but I'm saying roll it back all the way to 2020 before he had ever played the major leagues. You're looking at a minor leaguer. I feel like there's a lot of minor leaguers like this, right? Like a 7% walk rate, a 20% strikeout rate, and a sub 100 ISO. That's not a collection of players that I want to, have a ton of shares of. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and then it all comes back to, really hat tip to like the scouting people very, very early on, that you can see the skill sets. They see what can be had. They had the Lego instructions, and they're like, I know that this thing can be this really awesome Lego car, and everyone's like, well, this is just a bunch of jumbled pieces. But they had the right and luckily you're in the right place.
He's kind of an example of when we talk about, if he put together the best pieces out of what he's done so far, he's kind of done that, which is why I don't think there's another level.
Sure.
I think this might be close to his peak.
That's why I capped him like 15-15. I think is kind of like the cap of who he is. Maybe there's something there, but there's no, like you're saying, there's really nothing to tell us what is that going to be. It's not
the only clue is like the best, like the max EV is like, further away from his barrel rate than some other players. So like maybe he could tap into that max EV a little bit more and barrel some more. But given those sub 100 ISOs when he's coming up, I know he's bigger, he's stronger, he's 24 now. I don't see a 200 ISO coming out of this guy. I think Dustin Harris clearly has more power, and so a lot of this is tied to those defensive stats. So I'm glad you brought that up because I do think he's probably a steady performer for 5-6 years, but I don't know that he's going to have a peak season that's amazing, and I don't know that once the defense starts to fall apart, I don't know if he'll have a super long career.
Yeah, well, I think the takeaway for me with Tavares, if you're looking for the reasons to believe, pre 2020, it was age to level. They moved him really aggressively.
That's
if you
true.
think
He
about
was
what you
super
brought up
young.
on the show like a month ago, add some to that WRC plus based on his age for each level, and then you feel better about him. So I think that's where the willingness to bet on him came from, and it's part of where my willingness to continue betting on CJ Abrams comes from. It's because of outcomes like that.
I
think
was watching him yesterday, and I still don't really like anything about him as a player. But you're right.
I love this. This is so good for me.
He's super young.
I need
he looks
you
like
to
a
not
kid
like
out there.
him.
I couldn't believe it. I was like, who let the 16-year-old on the field?
That's what I'm saying. He won't look like that forever. Most likely. most likely. Let's move on to Noelvi Marte, another Reds prospect moving up. He's at AAA. We've talked a lot about the crowding that is already happening there, so we don't have to rehash all of that. But I think the question is, Welsh, I know you've had chances to see Noelvi Marte since he's been on two organizations that have spring facilities in Arizona. There's some power, there's some speed. Is he putting it all together to the point where you see a guy that's an easy 2020 player that plays third base or in the outfield? Like, where does he fit even on a less crowded team? Because there's a possibility he gets traded again, given the Reds' need for pitching.
I do think that's a possibility because, like you said, they're crowded across the board. I don't know if anything comes easy for Noelvi. I got super critical of him. There's this big thing like a year and a half ago or so about how big he got, and I was like, all right, let's wait for it. And then I got to see him again, and he looked slower, played really bad defense more recently, contact skills down. He was swinging through everything lower in the zone. Back into the AFL, he kind of picked it back up. The encouraging stuff is his strikeout percentage has dropped this year. It's at 17% in Double-A prior to the
But
prior
it's
to the
a little
promotion.
weird with all those whiff rates next to him.
Yeah, well,
it's
and that's the thing.
17% with an 11% whiff rate, and it's like,
and I don't believe, like, I'm worried he's going to be a much bigger strikeout guy than what the minor league numbers are giving, especially with some of the pitch recognition stuff with him. But you know what? He's also still adjusting. You want to talk to age to level? He's 21 years old, and he's going to AAA.
Was he big? Like, how did the power play?
Big.
Because those power numbers are not great.
Yeah, he got big. Actually, it was like the play-in game for the AFL. He absolutely destroyed one at Peoria that went on past the grass. I mean, he has got big, 450 plus type of power. It's just, can he tap into it? And you got these numbers up on the board. You can actually see that maybe some of the lowering of the pull has been to make better contact because you have seen some of the contact numbers get better this year. The 281 batting average is the best he's had since his high A with the Reds, and that was only in his Reds period of time.
Results contacts on these numbers that you're seeing on YouTube right now, like basically a 180 ISO for all that. So it's a little bit weird for me to see a guy, 55, 56, 60% pull rates, not all on the ground, and that produces 180 ISO. It's there's something weird about that for me.
Bottom line for me with him, with how the body really got thicker and bigger. I mean, they list him at 216. I mean, I've seen him probably closer to 230. I just don't think he's going to run aggressively. So, cool.
It's
he's
probably
got
not going to be a shortstop, especially given the team context.
Almost 100% not going to be a shortstop. Even if he's traded, I don't think he is. He worked a ton at third base. I think left field, right field, he's got the arm. So there's a potential he could definitely be a right fielder, depending where the body goes. I just don't think he's going to steal. I think there's 25 plus power in there. I don't think there's elite contact in there. I don't think he's a high batting average player. I think a guy like Colt Keith might be a better fantasy option than Noelvi Marte, but that might be me just kind of backtracking on. I just don't think, like, as you watch guys develop and stuff, he has declined in a lot of areas. Though you go and look and you're like, wow, 17, like you said, 17% K rate, that looks good. It just doesn't equate with the swinging strike rate. And I just don't know how, I don't know how the bumps and bruises are going to look over the next couple years. But hey, listen, he got promoted to AAA. He might get a cup of coffee later this year.
21-year-old, still 20% better than league average in
doubt.
AA.
Yeah, no doubt. He's still a great buy, but I'm kind of a sell on Noelvi if he's producing at a high level. I would be personally in like fantasy circles trying to get out once the value has pushed back up.
Especially if he gets traded out of Cincinnati, then he doesn't get the benefit of Cincinnati.
Yeah, and they've got, and we're looking at like, obviously you've got McLean and Ellie. You got Steer, who I think creates a problem, a good problem. But in the
It's
lower
kind of weird
levels,
that Marte hasn't picked up an outfield glove yet.
I think it is weird. And also at the lower levels, you got Cam Collier, who's a big prospect, Carlos Jorge, another middle infield prospect. I mean, they have got 3 or 4 more, Leonardo Balzacar, who got hurt. They have got a handful of low A, high A, shortstop, middle infield, corner infield prospects that it's like, I don't want to call any guy, expendable, because they can move these guys in positions, but this team can move him if they want to make a run. I think he's the prime player to move because they've got guys coming in the near future, and they're just stacked. They don't have a spot for him right now, even in the majors.
Yeah, and even playing him at third base, I think, opens up more opportunities for teams that acquire him. If you keep him on the infield dirt, maybe there's a little more long-term value there before an eventual move to the outfield. It is interesting to see the body changing that much at 21 years old, but I'm with you guys. I think this is a trade, like for sure. For Noelvi Marte, I think he's the easiest player to deal right now, and they can get current big league pitching back as part of that return. A couple names that people maybe have heard a little less about. Jared Jones, a pitcher in the Pirates organization, already getting up to AAA, and I don't think Jared Jones was on my radar at all prior to seeing the note about his promotion on RotoWire, but not a bad prospect. A second rounder back in 2020, high school kid that actually throws pretty hard from the left side, was getting really nice results at AA this year. Only 44 in a third innings, pitched 122 in 2/3 innings last year. So he won't get shut down early. If he's healthy, he's going to pitch all the way through the end of the season. And this could be a very brief late season debut. I don't know if I'm necessarily thinking about him as much for redraft purposes as I am for keeper in dynasty leagues where he might still be unrostered.
Yeah, I contacted someone who'd seen him live a couple times, and they saw that when they saw him a few weeks ago, it was 100, 100, and then 92 on the slider for a K. So Jones has the fastball velocity. Looks like a good hard slider. I guess a gyro slider from that velo. And then if you're looking at the erosion of his strikeout rate at AAA, a couple things going on here. You've got a guy who wants to be a starter, wants to turn the lineup over, doesn't want to max out the strikeout rate as much as be able to stay in games longer. So there's a little bit of an effort there. And then lastly, where he's pitching, it's ABS. So that can do funky things, I think, to strikeout rates, to walk rates. I look at the 16.5% swing strike rate for Jared Jones and in AAA and the 14% in AA, and think this is a guy I like.
Yeah, you look at the other prospects that are kind of ahead of him maybe in the pecking order. Quinn Priester has been at AAA all season long. I would imagine if they need somebody.
I've heard some bad things about his fastball shape, though, so I'm not sure that he's necessarily going to get the chance first.
He's kind of a straight line pitcher, like you said, with the fastball. Like I don't, in seeing him multiple times and actually sitting like behind backstop and watching the separation between. Yeah, this is Quinn Priester. Yeah. The separation on his pitches, I think he's easier to see for hitters, and I've seen him get beat up. He likes to sit on the secondaries, and I just don't think they're that good. Fastball, it's all right. I'm not a big Quinn Priester guy. I like Jared Jones. I actually think there might be some like Brian Wu type of thought process you could have in a player like him. Still working through the walk, still trying to figure out how to be a complete pitcher. The K numbers dropping with the walk rate still over 3 per 9. It's a little bit worrisome on
Quinn Priester fastball, four-seam fastball stuff plus in AAA, 72%.
Yeah, that's not a major league fastball.
No.
The sinker, a little bit better, 91. He could be a sinker first guy, so then he'd be sinker curve or sinker curve slider. That's all good and stuff, but what is he going to do against lefties? And I see 4 cutters in here, but I don't know if he's actually throwing a cutter. And if the 4-seam is really that bad, I think he's going to really struggle against lefties. That would be my prediction on Priester, is a struggle against lefties.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm noticing is last outing at AAA actually was his best of the season. 6 scoreless, just 2 walks, 11 Ks, scattered 3 hits. So in June,
if you do that, I guess you do get a chance first over Jones.
yeah, 29-12 over his last 29 innings for strikeout to walk. That's probably enough to get him that look, but Jones might be the guy that's a little overlooked, relatively speaking, in the organization right now.
To me, I think there's a corollary almost with the Oviedo and Ortiz thing going on in the major leagues, which is, Oviedo is a guy they wanted, they targeted, they traded for him, they got him. He has certain things that are nice, like his secondary, his breaking balls are very hard, but he also gets blasted a lot, and I personally don't like him that much, and I don't think his fastballs are any good. Ortiz is a guy who has really good fastballs but poor command that I'm more excited about, that's behind him, right? And so I think I might just end up doing a very similar thing where Priester gets the first shot, but I'm more excited about Jared Jones.
That's a totally viable way to go about it. We got some other injury news to pass along. Druw Jones suffered a setback with his hamstring injury. Welsh, you actually saw it happen.
Yeah, I was over at the complex, and it was a weird play, and I'm still beating myself for stopping. Sometimes, I'm filming things, and you're like, oh, okay, here's an easy out, and you just stop recording. So Drew's up for his 3rd at bat, and bases are loaded, and he beats one into the ground. And there's a bigger conversation. I am a little bit worried about Druw just overall and what I've seen. Rates. Yeah, and I'm very worried about what I'm seeing. He cannot get the ball in the air. His swing still looks great, but his pitch recognition is off. He's making really poor contact, and I am worried a little bit long term. So he beats his ground into the ball into the ground, and it goes to the shortstop. And I'm like, okay, I'll stop recording. Well, complex league, dude throws it. This is the Giants. It goes past the first baseman. Druw goes over to second. 2 guys score. Guys on third. Guy on third says, I'm going to score. Comes in. They throw it. Goes past him.
Oh, no.
He comes in, and Drew's on third, and they can't get to the ball. So Druw runs from third. You can see he is gassed, and he's going slow, and he dives in, and he scores a Little League grand slam because it's all errors and nothing counts in here. But that
would have been nice to have on tape.
I'm so mad I stopped recording. But he laid on the ground for a minute, absolutely gassed and exhausted, which was also a little concerning. Like, you shouldn't be that gassed. I mean, I would be dead.
Yeah, any of us would be, but
he got up
also
and
like 19-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not 170 pounds.
Yeah, you didn't go second in the draft last year.
Yeah, not quite second, not quite there. But he gets up and he walks slowly over to the dugout, and they took him out of that game. And I think it was on that turn to third, he pulled his hamstring. But the bigger problem, there's 2 things here. This is 3rd injury that he's had now. And this is something to really keep an eye on. I will tell you this, from my interview I did with him in spring training to now, it was weird because he is physically bigger. His neck was bigger. It was the thing that jumped out immediate to me. He obviously has gained weight, which you want to, but his neck was so much bigger than it was before. Like, so you can start to see the muscle in the body. And I think there's a lot of body changes that are happening. And I think that, at least what I've seen, I think some guys really struggle with the change from like that younger, kid body to the adult major league rigorous training body. And I think that could be playing a role in this. That's maybe me compensating a little bit for it. But I'm really worried about the gameplay because this happened in Visalia. It happened here. Everything is in the ground right now.
He has something like a 75% ground ball rate for his career.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what's happening with it. And it's a rough look when you compare to what Jackson Holliday is doing. I mean, Jackson Holliday has almost become a unanimous #1 overall prospect. The hard hit numbers are going crazy. Guy walks. He's got a 400 OBP everywhere. I think in the last 30 days in his league, he leads in walks again, which he's done. He's a monster, and the separation between those two are really big. So I'm second guessing, as someone who is a big Druw Jones guy, that, between 3 injuries, really crazy high ground ball rates, and not making great baseball, on-field baseball decisions, that I just need to step back as far as where his value is right now. I think it does lead to maybe a good buy opportunity because there's, negative thoughts on there, and I'm going to bring him down, but I'm not going to destroy his value because he's still a super talented player. This might be a wash year, which really stinks. And we're doing a little bit too much of that with Diamondback prospects, but I also point out, like, even though you've had washed years with like Jordan Lawler and you had one
There's
with
a bunch
Corbin
of
Carroll
ones in the major leagues that are doing pretty good.
they're working out. They're working out. So you still go on the side of talent. I've seen major, huge adjustments that he has made just physically, but that was the reason behind the injury. And he's not going to get back into games, which is going to be complex because he was supposed to go to Visalia this weekend and go back to A-ball. He's now staying, and he's going to play in complex league again mid-July. So hopefully he's back in Visalia. And I'm just hoping we're going to see some big baseball changes, but he's got enough to focus on just trying to get himself healthy that maybe that's curbing some of the developmental stuff he needs to do, like, hit the ball in the air once or twice.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Disappointing so far, but I think you're right. Probably creates a pretty good opportunity if you want to go try and make a move for Druw Jones. You see someone contending, and Druw Jones is stashed away on their roster as a future minor league. The timetable gets stretched out. People get a little impatient. Sometimes you just see results that are as poor as what Jones has shown in that very limited time he's even been healthy, and that spooks you a little bit, probably more than
there's going to be a lot of negative. That's my big point here. Is like, I also don't think, like, I'm not paying for a top 25 prospect with him right now. I want the discounts, but there's going to be a lot of negative stuff about Druw Jones, I think, in the next like 3 or 4 months. Not, it's just injuries, performance, ground ball rate, comparisons to Jackson Holiday. I think it's going to be a storm of stuff over the next couple months, which is going to deflate a lot of the value. And that I might wait a little bit more for that so you can take advantage of it and buy.
It is interesting that he's also like, he's a number 2 pick in the draft. Okay, so that's like a marker in his value, and that's like, okay, that's now we can compare him to other number 2 picks in the draft. However, he's also a 19-year-old in complex league, and that's another marker of where he is in his career and how likely he is to succeed. And both of those markers are very different.
Well, he's only there because of the injuries, though. Like, we should view him as an A-ball guy from how the D-backs.
Well, I just also mean like how far away he is and how likely he is to be a major leaguer. Even if he was an A-ball, like high, low A, like it wouldn't matter that much. It would still be, like I still invoke the name of Hedbert Perez. Although that's very different because Hedbert Perez was like what, like a $50,000, international signing. And not a second pick in the draft.
And that was people
he also
falling
wasn't
in love
eligible
with.
to go in the draft. So we don't have the draft marker for a lot of these international guys. So I don't know. I'm digressing. But what I'm saying is we have a couple pieces of information on Jones, maybe 3 pieces. A very small piece of information on how he plays on the field, which we could almost ignore if the other 2 markers were great. But the other 2 markers are, they're going in different directions.
Yeah, and I would lean on the side of skills overall over like what's gone on this year, because sometimes there is just throwaway years and it's just a disaster from so many standpoints.
Surgery and
but the worst part about this
apparently.
is, to your point of how far off he is, this is going to come back to that, like, Corbin Carroll's in the majors and Marco Luciano's hitting at A-ball. Like, Jackson Holiday legit might be with the Orioles next year. And Druw Jones is going to be lucky to be out of high A next year. I mean, those guys might be
that's
at least
sort of what I was
apart.
pointing to. I don't know. He's not the number 1 player. If I'm selling, he's not the number 1 player in the deal coming back.
Probably, yeah. I mean, most likely not.
I don't want him to be.
Yeah, I get that.
Unless it's a small deal where I'm like, I'll give you this, like, old pitcher.
You trade Colt Keith to get Druw Jones?
No.
See, I think that's
that's
a dynasty, like, prospecty type of trade where someone's like, "Ooh, I want this prospect that's going to get production now," and someone who maybe is rebuilding is like, "Well, I can." Get
I would
Druw
trade
Jones.
Druw Jones to get Colt Keith. I don't know which one you're asking me.
I was saying, would you trade Colt Keith to get Druw Jones? But you're saying it both ways, you definitively. So that would be a fun one. DVR, do you agree?
I'm 100. If that's my choice, I'm taking Druw Jones. I'm the one trading, Colt Keith in that situation.
Yeah, and
I'll take the chance.
3 years of production before Druw comes up, so I get that.
Yeah.
But it's just the potential of the number 1 overall prospect. My problem is, it's like, I'm worried how much that starts to fade. I haven't seen Druw run a whole bunch in the games that I've seen, like, at all. So how aggressive is he going to run, and where is he going to start tapping in? But that's why I'll make bigger decisions on him next year instead of being crazy reactive this year. But I do want to buy.
Speaking of players who have been dealing with injuries in big ways recently, Brennan Davis is out with core muscle surgery.
No.
Last year it was a back injury. So he played 45 games this year at AAA. Last year he played 43 before he got hurt. The slash lines are almost the same, just brutal. The K rate got better this year, but this is a guy who unfortunately has just lost a ton of prospect value. Is he not the same guy physically right now because of this combination of injuries that he's had? I think that's a fair question to ask, especially as the younger pieces of that Cubs core start to come through the system. You could see Brennan Davis getting passed by guys like Pete Crow Armstrong.
Oh, that one's not even a question.
That's already happened on prospect list, but I'm just saying.
But like Kevin Alcantara,
fly right by him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that might be the next one. Now that has also happened, but I've been very defending of Brennan Davis for a long time because of the tools. I'm big, hey, if you got great tools, I want to bet on that. I'm kind of done. Like this, I actually worry. This might be an outline of Druw Jones into the near future, which I really worry about. This is a guy that went from crazy skinny, and then one off season just added all this big muscle, and it has been injury after injury. I think he is insanely talented, but I'm out because I haven't seen it materialize really at any point. He doesn't steal a whole bunch. He's not hitting. He also, when he's been there, the guy hasn't hit over 250 since 2001. I mean, that's not good. So I'm out on Brennan Davis, and Pete Armstrong
even with
has
some okay strikeout rates. It's a weird.
Yeah.
Another
injury, by the way.
I'm nervous about anybody who strikes out 30% in the minors anyway. So.
Yeah, and as most people are. Another injury to point out in big prospects, Zach Veen also had a surgery, I believe, on his wrist and is out for the year. So you want to talk about a couple prospects we've lost.
And was not having the best year to begin with.
No, we saw no power developing with him as well, which is something we wanted to see him take the next step. So two guys that are moving down list. Veen, I still bet on a little bit more, but I'm pretty out on Brennan Davis. I don't want any part of it.
Well, fire up the Tecmo player is healthy and is being pushed out of the hospital music because Ronny Mauricio is healthy again at AAA. We needed a palate cleanser. We need someone coming back from injuries. They made that trade. They sent Eduardo Escobar to the Angels over the weekend. So I wonder if there is a better path now for Mauricio to break through on this underwhelming Mets team. And, I'll throw this to you first. I mean, what type of player do you think Mauricio is going to be based on what we're seeing from him in the upper levels of the Mets system?
It's a really strange combo. I can't peg the strikeout rate right now in AAA. Ronny Mauricio has a 16% strikeout rate, but he has an 11% whiff rate. And last year in AA, he had a 15% whiff rate and a 23% strikeout rate. The way that he doesn't strike out as much as his whiff rate suggests he will is by not walking and being super aggressive. So, in the major leagues, we're looking for a low K rate, low walk rate slugger.
And Soler kind of has been
Ozzie
that
Albies
type of guy. Okay.
That's a good. I mean, if
that's not bad,
if that's who he is, you'd be excited about that for sure.
If the strikeout rate is more than that, then we could be looking at Starling Marte, like more vintage.
He's not going to.
He doesn't steal bases though.
He's not going to run. I don't think like Marte.
Last season Mauricio 20 for 31 at AA as a base stealer. This season he's 12 for 17.
There's some Leody Taveras there, but I think he has more power than that.
Yeah, he does.
Hunter Renfroe.
Hunter Renfroe with some speed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean 200 plus ISO, 3 last 4 stops in the minors.
And Hunter Renfroe has this 305 OBP that I kind of think Mauricio might be around.
Okay, yeah. So the reduced OBP, but does enough damage to make it work and kind of be a number 6 type hitter in a good lineup.
Super valuable while you have him on cost control. I do wonder if he's ever going to get a huge free agent deal, which may not matter if he comes up and he's hitting, 260 with 25 to 30 homers and 10 to 15 steals, the 305 OBP doesn't bother you that much unless it, reduces the runs in RBI, puts him lower in the order, but it means he probably has a job. The 116 max EV says the power is real. He's not getting there with his legs. So I think this is real power with a super aggressive approach, and a decent hit tool, but definitely some flaws still there, as exciting as he's been.
I believe on his return, they started working him in left field. So I think he's working on some outfield right now, just more flexibility for the team, and that kind of helps us as well for knowing whether he's qualifying at multiple positions in fantasy or not. It's just more opportunities for him to be playing with the big league team.
Yeah, and Brett Beatty's defense has been a problem. He's also not hitting as much as I thought he was going to hit right away. So third base could become an issue too.
Relevant to this discussion of Ronny Mauricio, Brett Beatty, and the New York Metropolitans is a tweet that just happened on the tweeter machine.
Oh,
Steve Cohen
tweeted?
Personally have a press conference before the game on Wednesday.
Okay.
And he
That's
said,
unusual.
"You will get it from me straight."
Okay.
I mean, this sounds like it's either going to be like, man, we're underwhelming, aren't we, guys? Like, or is
yeah,
this
I
going to
kind
be
of
like,
think he's going to get out there and be like, "Yeah, they should be playing better, and we're going to do everything we can to get better."
accountability?
Thanks for coming today.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay,
So
thanks
he'll
for that,
own it. He'll say, "This is my fault. I'm the owner. I hired the wrong people."
Unless he's announcing that he's firing Buck tomorrow,
or Billy Epler.
Okay, so that's bigger. So that would be
Billy
bigger.
Epler. No, that never happens on June 27. I'm sorry, we looked at this.
You wait until after the trade deadline.
You don't fire the GM in the middle of the season.
Yeah, sometimes they go before the end of the year.
Yeah, but
It
that's
depends if
usually
you
a
have the next
rebuilding
person
squad.
ready.
That's like after the trade deadline.
Right.
I think he'll let Billy Epler, sell pieces.
That's the other thing. The Mets could end up being another team kind of like the White Sox, where they've got plenty of useful big league players that they could flip, and suddenly being a seller in a league with a lot of buyers, thanks to expanded playoffs, they can at least help their future by tearing up their present a bit more.
But then the
Yay.
White Sox say they're like, we're only going to trade pieces we're going to trade little pieces. Like, they won't trade anything that's going to bring actual value.
Yeah, and I think the Mets would be the same, because the Mets still want to be competitive next year. So if they
here's Tyler
they
McGill.
trade anything, it would be people who are free agents next year. Carlos Carrasco, Mark Canha has a club option. David Robertson is a free agent. Eno has an option. Tommy Pham is a free agent. Those are the types of players that they could trade. But there could be some actual desire for some of these players.
Scherzer, Verlander. I don't know. It's more of a 3-0 show topic, so we'll save it for future 3-0s.
I don't think you do that, because the Mets still want to be competitive next year.
Yeah, another year on this core, and they're not competing right now. But we'll move on. We'll move on to the summer dynasty consideration. We had a mailbag question from Terry. Terry wanted to know, where would we stack Dylan Crews and Paul Skenes if we were ranking them just as like dynasty players right now? So before they actually officially could be on the list. So Welsh, Crews first. Like, where does he fall for you in terms of his present dynasty value, as some midsummer dynasty drafts might be just around the corner?
So if we're talking like just prospects for a minute, in one of my updates I do on my Patreon, the inthisleague.com, I put my top 25 draft prospects earlier in the month, and I put relative range of where I think I'm going to end up putting them. And Dylan Crews is going to be a top 10 overall prospect as soon as he's drafted. Like, that's the type of ability we're looking at. Skenes, I put top 20, but like someone had asked me this a couple weeks back, like, where do you think Skenes would be as far as, compared to the rest of the prospects right now? And it's like, once you get Gavin and Yuri off the board, I think Skenes is probably near number one. Some people like Hurston Waldrep, like his stuff a little bit better out of Florida, but I mean, I think Skenes is like the most complete guy. So it's like Skenes versus Andrew Painter, who's got injuries, versus Ricky Tiedemann, who, as far as I can tell, might have some injuries as well. Mm-hmm. These three, I think, sit in that range. So I would have Crews, no doubt, top 10, probably even above guys like Junior Caminero that are in there, Evan Carter, Pete Crow Armstrong. And I'd have Skenes in that same general, probably more like top 15 now. So from a dynasty perspective, I think Crews is a no doubt top 100 dynasty asset, and I think Skenes is right there as well, especially if whoever drafts him tells us a narrative of like, hey, we're just skipping him. We're just not going to bother with the minor leagues, or he's going to make a couple starts and he goes up. I would just say it's safe to say they're both right near top 100 dynasty prospects, with the smart play betting on hitters over pitchers, unless maybe you're in a points league where
What's your
Crews,
top 10?
Yeah,
Because I think a lot of those names you've been mentioning in the top 10, we it seems like Holiday number 1,
yep,
Caminero,
Lawler. You've got
Lawler,
Lawler. Some
Caminero,
people might
Carter.
Jackson Churio.
Churio's still up there. Yep.
What's your ordering on those, or just what's your general ordering? Or
I'll pull this up here because I've got Ellie. Ellie still qualifies. So Ellie is number 1. I've got Jackson Holiday 2, Churio 3, Lawler 4, James Wood is another one of those who's up at AA. He's 5. Yuri is 6, but you could justify Yuri up at
Yuri
4.
and Ellie could be off, so then we're 40.
Yeah, so they're going. And Royce I have at 7. He'll be off. And Gavin I have at 10. So I have 4 players in my top 10 that will be coming off here in the short term. The other names, Colton Cowser, Caminero, and then 11 is Manzardo. Listen, Dylan Crews, I think, now that I'm looking at this, Dylan Crews is going to be top 5. He'll be top 5 for me. And Skenes is probably, he would be the number 1 pitcher. He'll probably be 10. So yeah, so they'll probably both be top 10 for me. Dylan Crews
That's
at
sort
5.
of. I've seen some. I've seen some lists out there. I can get with that. I think personally, though, I'm keeping Caminero over him.
Over Crews? Or
yeah, I think
okay.
so. And this is it's not quite a great. It doesn't port over because I mean, there's a lot of people saying that Dylan Crews is one of the best college players of all time, and I was looking at his college stats, and they're kind of amazing. I think this year he has a 20% walk rate and a 13% strikeout rate. And I don't even want to report the slash line because it's it's college, but 426, 567, 713, like. Okay, so anyway, he's performed
almost double
really
walks
well.
and strikeouts too, by the way.
Yeah, I
71 walks
know.
to 46 strikeouts.
So he's really great. Drew Gilbert, as a player in Tennessee, was not necessarily as good, but he had a nice tournament run. He was a first-round pick by Arizona.
Houston.
Real flashy, like. High energy guy that a lot of people were like, okay, the Astros got their shortstop, their center fielder of the future, hit the ground running, really killed it in 2022 and 23, in high A. And then this year was promoted to Double A. And I think you mentioned something about Altuve saying this kid's ready. And so then
I
he was
did a
promoted.
rehab stop and said this guy is ready for the majors now when he played with Drew Gilbert, which they're going to say,
Yeah.
but that's a pretty good comp for a player to throw out there.
Yeah, and so then Gilbert was promoted to Double A sometime like shortly after that, and then hit the biggest slump of his career. And there's a great piece by Chandler Rome up on our site about this. Sounds like he had an elbow injury that was putting him in DH. Now, when you DH, you already have a sort of penalty versus when you play in the field. But apparently, with his kind of attitude, his energy, he really struggled to have an outlet for his negative energy when he did something bad at the plate. And so he couldn't go out and make a diving catch or whatever, in center and kind of, right ship. So it's like kind of the opposite of like bringing your troubles out to the field with you. He kind of used the field to dissipate some of those. So Drew Gilbert has hit this roadblock, and he's 22 and he's probably still a good prospect. I don't think he belongs in the top 10 in this top 10 that we're talking about, but this is just an example of the things that can happen along the way. And as can't miss as Dylan Crews looks, they also had a list up during the game of guys who'd won Golden Spikes, which is like that's the MVP of college, right?
Yeah.
Won the Golden Spikes and won it overall, and won the championship. The other names were Tito Francona. Who was the other one? I was like, what is this? Is the list? Oh man, I wish I could remember the other one. One golden spikes and national champion. But Tito being on there, I was like, okay, not everyone who does this turns in like an amazing Ben McDonald. Was the other one maybe?
What a list.
A list of
Uh,
two.
Yeah.
anyway,
What
it was
names?
a short list,
Yeah.
but it wasn't the
To your
best
point.
list in the world. And it's
Yeah,
sort
that
of
was your point.
all I'm saying is long-winded way of saying there's a lot of time between now and Dylan Crews making the major leagues, and we haven't even seen him hit other pros. We're just looking at college numbers, and every year there are people who put up nasty, nasty, nasty college numbers that start with a 4 and start with a 5 and start with a 7. So like, I would rather have some guys that have suffered these things like Drew Gilbert. And I'm not putting Drew Gilbert ahead of Dylan Crews, but I will put Junior Caminero, who's been through a lot of development time and is
Yep.
getting closer and closer. I would personally put Junior Caminero ahead of Dylan Crews.
And I'd have them close. The one thing I wanted to bring up, because you looked this up before we started the show, I was really enamored in, if anyone watched that last game, the championship game for LSU, that Cruz, I think there's just a lot more power to be developed in him. And I think I think Tommy White has provided him the ability to be a little bit more patient. He's walked more. He's striking out less. He has protection behind him. But you saw he hit this oppo field ball 107, and I was like, man, hitting it opposite field 107 is really something. And we went and took a look before the show, and we were looking at EV averages from hard pull to opposite field. And I don't want to take it from you, Eno. Do you want to mention what you saw? Just if, not that it's a crazy correlative thing, but when you look at guys have big opposite field EVs, we noticed that there was a pretty big average difference between opposite field and pull power exit velocities.
Yeah, I should have known that, but I also knew that just like given the same exit velocity, balls that are pulled perform better than balls that go the opposite way. So, that was where I was coming at it. But then when we looked, it turns out that even hitting it hard the opposite way is harder. So the average ball the opposite way with no launch angle consideration, just the average ball hit the opposite way, 85 miles an hour. Up a little, down a little, 85 miles an hour. The average pulled ball, up a little, down a little, 90 miles an hour. So you've got a 5 mile an hour difference there, and I don't know if it's fair to say that 107 is a 112, but compared to average, it's more. So seeing a 112 like that, and seeing the ability to go the opposite way with it like that is pretty intense. The opposite field exit velocity leaders, again, no marker for exit no marker for launch angle, but just who has 50 balls in play this year with opposite field exit velocity goodness. Aaron Judge, of course. I mean, he hits the ball hard everywhere. Bobby Dalbec second, Ronald Acuna Jr., Yandy Diaz, Corey Seager, Tommy Pham, Mark Vientos, Vladimir Guerrero, Matt Olson, Giancarlo Stanton, Darren Ruff. Okay, so it's one of those lists where 8 out of every 10 are amazing players.
Dylan Crews.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at guys that go the opposite way and hit it 100 plus. How often that happens? Bo Bichette leads the league this year. 37 opposite field balls hit at 100 miles an hour or harder, which is just head and shoulders better than anybody else. Julio Rodriguez is second with 26, by the way. But lots of good players in that list too. Yoshida, Goldschmidt, Nathaniel Lowe. So
I was telling you too, I actually think Bo Bichette might be like categorically kind of an interesting comp for Crews. If you're looking at just stats, from stolen bases to power to overall hit numbers, like that he could be like a Bo Bichette in the
There's some
outfield. That's
approach
the type of
that seems similar. I guess one big difference is, Bo Bichette with a better plate approach. That would be pretty exciting, dude.
Yeah.
You gave me Bo Bichette with a better plate approach. I think he's definitely in my top 10.
So both Crews and Skenes rank very highly. These are legitimately great prospects that shouldn't take long. I think the concern with Skenes would just be the number of innings he's thrown already. He threw 85 and 2/3 last year. He's at 120 plus. Like, why would you?
Velo innings and then high stress, high innings count, high pitch count games. I mean, we were talking about Quinn Matthews, the Stanford starter, being at 150 pitches. I don't think his 93-mile-an-hour fastball is as stressful on his arm as Skenes' 99, 100 plus that he's throwing, into the 110th and 120th pitch of his appearance. So definitely some concern there.
Though he only has around 100, a little over 100 innings total pitch in his 2 previous years combined. So just throwing that out,
Yeah.
like though the weight of a lot of it is this year, and also just the amount of pitches he's going per performance. I mean, if you were to take the pitch count, he probably added in, another. I mean, another 3 or 4 starts just on top of the amount of extra pitches that were put on top of it if you did that. But it'll be an interesting case because I think there's something to be said. I think when I think of Paul Skenes, I also think of like what Yuri Perez is doing with the Marlins and this whole innings cap and how much of the science, how much of the science are they leaning back into when it's like he's also amazing? Is he really going to fall apart? And it's like if Skenes falls apart, the amount of articles that are going to come out about the pitch count at the lower levels destroying pitchers will come back up. But if he doesn't, I mean, no one will probably talk about it, but I just think about that and correlate it to like what Yuri Perez is doing and just the sadness of shutting these pitchers down because of, understandably, but some of these arbitrary, like he can only do this amount of innings over, or the same thing in college. They're like, this is the recommended amount of pitches a guy can go on this amount of rest, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, sometimes let it eat. Let Yuri Perez eat, please.
Yeah, and just one last thought on Skenes, too. He was a closer his first year in college when he pitched at Air Force, so maybe if a team wanted to throw him as a reliever a little bit this year, they could, but, I mean, you're talking about someone that you think is going to be at the front of your rotation. You're not going to gamble with the long-term health.
To the Angels.
Yeah.
He's going too high for them to pick him.
Yeah, he won't end up there. We'll save the futures game talk for next week. The game will actually be played like 10 days from now, so we'll still have time to kind of preview the rosters. We'll have some complex observations from Welsh. I had one mailbag question, just a quick out-the-door sort of question. Manny Mo wanted to know in a keeper league, Andrew Abbott or Gavin Williams, who would you take? For me, it's an easy Williams, but is there any case for Andrew Abbott that either of you want to make?
Not me. This is the easy Gavin Williams for me, but I don't know.
You could maybe make the case that like the breaking ball is better for Andrew Abbott. So you're kind of got maybe a breaking ball feel guy versus a fastball guy. But
is that like a Bieber versus Garrett Cole type of thing?
Yeah, maybe something like that if you want to push it to some of the edges. Yeah. But as tempted as I am to kind of go for breaking ball guys, I looked at the year-to-year correlation of all the different pitch types for my last article, and the tightest year-to-year correlation in Stuff Plus year-to-year is the fastball. And that makes sense. I think it's hard to change the shape of a pitcher's fastball. I think you can change shapes around it to make them fit, but they are what they are given their fastball. Gavin Williams has a good fastball. Andrew Abbott's is okay. So I'm taking Gavin Williams' fastball.
Yeah, I think Andrew Abbott's going to be a solid or even good big league starter for a long time, but I think Williams has a better floor and even a higher ceiling based on what they can do right now. The park also works against Abbott quite a bit, and some of the strikeout numbers we saw, as we learned, were juiced by the pre-tacked ball at AA this year. So there's a lot of stuff going on that, if you're number scouting especially, that might deceive you a little bit with Abbott's long-term value. It's part of why I think there's a big gap between where Abbott was ranked at the beginning of the season and where he ended up prior to his debut. So a lot to think about. On our way out the door, a reminder, you can get a subscription to The Athletic for $1 a month for the first year at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. You can find Welsh on Twitter at isitthewelsh. You can find Eno at Eno Saris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.